So many years after that moment on the bridge, you did this TEDx talk and you talked about that story, and you decided to seek out the man in the light brown jacket who in the moment, you never got his name or any identifying features about him other than the jacket. And it turned out he was looking for you too, and you
Hmm.
actually got to meet. Can you describe that meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I remember. So after he saved my life, he just went on his way, and like you say, I recognized at the time that he was wearing a light brown jacket. I could feel the heat of his body behind me, but that was about it. I didn't see his face because the way I was on the edge of the bridge, and I vaguely remembered his voice, but also it was this thing where I was so collapsed into myself that even if he was looking at me right in my face, I probably wouldn't have noticed or recognized because I was just so closed down. Um, and then I went on with my life and really didn't give him a second thought for years until I think it was in grad school. And I started to have dreams. I had a dream about him. And it was just kind of this, it was more a dream without vision, but with sound and with a kinetic kind of quality to it, where I could feel his body and hear his voice, but I couldn't see him. And I think that was the very earliest seed of when I started to think about him. And then after I did the TEDx talk in which I talk about him saving my life, still not knowing who he was, I didn't tell anybody that my secret, as I stood on that famous red dot, was that I didn't even actually know if he was real. I didn't know if I had just made him up in my mind as this kind of angel devil over my shoulder, with the guy on the sidelines and him, and if it was just a convenient plot point that I had created in my own mind to make my own story make sense because I needed it to. So then uh, I had this profound feeling after the TEDx talk, especially since it was so popular, of being incomplete, that my story was incomplete, and that I needed to find this person to find out if he was actually real or if I'd just made him up. So I had reached out to a few journalist friends who I knew, who, because by that point I'd been working in media advocacy for several years, and I asked, what the best way to find this person was. All I knew was that he was wearing a man with a light brown jacket in the early 2000s in Cape Breton. I knew nothing else about him. And I applied for my police records to be released under a Freedom of Information Act request, which they denied on the grounds that they can't disclose records about a minor. I appealed and said, I am the minor, and under the legislation, you are allowed to give them to me, in fact. Um, and then they denied again, so I appealed to the official body, which agreed with me and said, yeah, no, of course you got to give him his own records. So, and that was another great example for me of how people are routinely deprived of their rights because they don't know what their rights are, and they don't realize that you can push back against power. I had learned that because of, I think, my experiences with mental illness. But then I got the records and there was no reference to him anyway. There was a bunch of records missing and all kinds of stuff. I pulled the medical records. He wasn't in there. So then I was emailing with Andre Picard from the Globe and Mail, and I was just kind of bouncing some questions off him, and then I just got this urge and this realization that I've been doing stuff in public now. I've been public about my illness and about his story, and that seems to get great response from people. So why don't I just ask the public to help me find this guy? It wasn't some big grand plan. I fired off an email to a producer at Canada AM, which was then on the air, and I'd been on a couple of times by that point. And I said, I got this idea. I want to find this stranger that I talk about in the TED Talk, who saved my life, and I don't know really anything else about him. And the producer responded almost right away. He said, great, let's do it. And I went up to the studio. I said I wanted to do it the day after Bell Let's Talk Day because I'm a big supporter of Bell Let's Talk Day, but I'm also a big supporter of talking every day. So I went up like 5 o'clock in the morning or something, went on, and they showed some clips from the TED Talk. I talked about this stranger. I shared my desire to find him on social media, on my Twitter and Facebook pages. And within about an hour, I start getting flooded with messages from people who said that they saw the story. This thing goes viral all around the world right away because it was morning news too. So I guess it was easy to pick it up all around the world. And then I start getting messages from people who said they knew who I was talking about. One guy said he was his roommate at the time, and the stranger came home and told him about everything that had happened. And then another guy who said he was his brother-in-law or another relation, and they'd been sharing the story for more than a decade among the family that this guy was a hero. And he was the one who told me that it turned out the stranger had seen my TED Talk a week before I went on national television looking for him, and that he had already written me a letter in case someday he ever found me. Because it turned out he didn't know if I had just gone back to the bridge the next day after he saved my life and finished what I'd started. And they asked if they could send me the letter. I agreed, and they did. And his very first words to me, I flicked on the camera on my iPad and recorded myself reading this letter. So, Mark, if you ever want to see somebody really ugly crying on YouTube, you can look up this video of me, because his very first words were, "Hi, Mark, my name is Mike," and that was. It was at that moment that I realized that he was real, because he had a name, and he never had a name before. He was just kind of a figure in my mind. And he told me about how he didn't know if I just went back the next day. He told me about how scared he was in that moment, because he wasn't a mental health professional. He wasn't a crisis worker or anything like that. All he could do was focus on my fingers on the railing. And Mike said that when he approached the railing and looked over, it made him sick to see the world from my perspective. And I realized in that moment that that's what kept me there, him talking to me about seemingly the most banal, meaningless things, but that he was connecting with me because he took the time to see the world from my perspective, which I felt like nobody else had done. So after he sent me that letter and I read it, I knew we had to meet, and we flew him up to Toronto. We put him up in a beautiful hotel suite at the Shangri-La, because it turns out if you tell people a really good story in an email, they just give you a bunch of free stuff. So the Shangri-La Hotel gave him a beautiful suite.
Yeah, everybody wants to be part of the story at that point, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
exactly. Which was great, because
Yeah.
they were very comfortable. And we brought along the Canada M cameras along again, because we figured we started this in public, we might as well finish it in public. And we met in downtown Toronto in Nathan Phillips Square. And as soon as Mike saw me, and as soon as I saw him, I recognized him. And I hadn't seen him before, but just something in me recognized something in him. And the first thing he did was walk straight toward me, look directly in my eyes, and he wrapped his arms around me again, like he did the last time we were together. And he hugged me. And I told Mike that I had no idea how I could possibly thank him. How do you thank somebody for not only saving your life, but he'd been the role model that had given me my whole life. I modeled my life after being like him. So the best thing that I told him I could do was just show him the life that he had given me. And I introduced him to my wife and to my then 2-year-old little boy. And now he's my second little boy's godfather. And he hasn't met my little girl yet, but I hope he will soon. And I talked to him about, my hobbies and my interests and my work and all the stuff that I was interested in that we talked about on the bridge that night that I never thought I would ever be allowed to have. So, I think being able to finally show him the life that he made possible to me brought that whole story deep inside me to a completion, and it felt right.